Welcome to Equipping and Supporting Burmese Women After the Coup. Please welcome our host, Olivia Enos, Senior Policy Analyst in Heritage's Asian Studies Center.
Hello, and welcome to the Heritage Foundation virtually on this International Women's Day. I'm so delighted to have my speakers joining me here today, but also all of you joining us as well. Burma and its people are really near and dear to my heart. I think that it is a place that the international community believed once had so much promise, especially for democratic reform. And people had hoped that it would have a freedom-loving future. Some might say that the hopes that that bright future might happen are completely dashed. And this is especially true after we all watched the Burmese military carry out a coup on February 1st of 2021. Since that time, the Burmese military, according to the Assistance Association of Political Prisoners, Burma, has taken as political prisoner nearly 10,000 individuals. And we know that more than 1,500 of them have in fact been killed, also at the hands of the Burmese military. The military has killed and plundered. They have raped and sexually abused. They've attempted to thwart any sort of organized efforts to oppose their draconian rule. And they've done so by shutting down the internet and by restricting access to even cell phone usage. And they did all of this throughout the coup in the aftermath of already having carried out what the United Nations said was genocide and crimes against humanity against its Muslim minority, Rohingya. And yet, and I want to pause here, and yet the Burmese people have not given up hope. And as long as the Burmese people have hope and as long as they're fighting, I hope that we can come alongside them in any way that is possible. And that's why I'm excited to host this program today. I think with that hope that the Burmese people have, it necessitates action from the Biden administration, from Congress, and from civil society. Because our goal should be to strengthen the hands of the Burmese people and to weaken the hands of the Burmese military in any way that we possibly can. I just want to highlight very quickly 3 possible ways that the Biden administration can do this. First, they can do so through continued sanctions and any attempts to close the loophole on sanctions already in place against the military and any entities that are lining their private coffers, especially against the oil and gas industry. Second, we should look for ways that the U.S. can extend safe haven through priority to refugee status to survivors of the coup, but also in particular to survivors of genocide and crimes against humanity. And third, and most importantly, the U.S. government should issue an atrocity determination, saying that what happened to the Rohingya in 2017 is what it is, which is genocide and crimes against humanity. I could list so many other things that the U.S. government can and should be doing, like releasing every political prisoner that's currently held, or issuing assistance to the civil disobedience movement in any way that we possibly can. But I want to transition us to introductions to welcome the true stars of this show. And, this is the reason why I'm truly excited to be hosting this program today. I gave a very general introduction about the coup, but I'm excited to celebrate the bravery and the resilience of Burmese women in particular. And I think there are no 2 better women, perhaps, to represent this cause than Ambassador Kelly Currie and also Weiwei Niu. And I'm delighted to have them back, of course, virtually to the Heritage stage today. So let me briefly introduce them both. Then I'm going to have Kelly speak first, and then Weiwei. We're going to have a little bit of a conversation with some discussion questions, and then I'm going to be turning it over to you, the audience members, in order to take questions. So please be prepared with your questions ready after we hear from Weiwei and Kelly. So I first want to introduce Ambassador Currie. Kelly previously served as the Ambassador for Global Women's Issues at the U.S. Department of State. Prior to that, she worked with the incredible Nikki Haley at USUN, serving as the U.S. Special Representative for Economic and Social Issues. And prior to that, she's had an illustrious career in the State Department on Capitol Hill and just truly standing alongside the Burmese people. She's a fellow Hoya, graduating from Georgetown Law. And then prior to that, she received her undergraduate degree from the University of Georgia. Then we'll turn to Weiwei Niu, a dear friend of mine. She is the founder and executive director of the Women's Peace Network. In addition to this, she holds many various fellowships, including a visiting senior research fellow position at the Human Rights Center at UC Berkeley's School of Law. She graduated from Berkeley Law in 2018 and also received her bachelor's from Yangon East University. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Kelly to kick off our discussion today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Olivia. And it is a pleasure to be here with you and of course, with our good friend, Weiwei Niu, and to be able to join you on International Women's Day and talk about how incredible Burmese women have been in terms of their role in the struggle for democracy, human rights, and justice in Burma or Myanmar. And I appreciate your very kind introduction, but I feel like I'm a poor substitute for the many, many women that Weiwei Niu and I have known and worked with over the years. I've been working with Burmese women for nearly 3 decades now, and I've watched them move very, very strongly from the sidelines of the democracy movement in Burma and playing, I think, being kept in a way on the sidelines and in many ways overshadowed by one woman, by Aung San Suu Kyi, and seeing their own roles in the movement and their own voices diminished for a long period of time, to being now, I think, at the center of the democratic and of the movement for democracy, human rights, and justice in Burma. Weiwei is a great example of this generational shift. To see a young Rohingya woman like Weiwei Niu be one of the leading voices speaking out, especially including since the coup, but even before, Weiwei had a growing international profile as a leading voice for women of her country and especially of her community. Representing her community, but since the coup, she's been an incredible example of what the power of women's voices can do to drive forward a movement. We've seen, especially in the period of the last year, Burmese women, especially young women, really emerge as key leaders in the civil disobedience movement, as key leaders in the national unity government, as key voices driving for unity and progress among the peoples of Burma, especially helping to give voice to ethnic nationality challenges around impunity for the military, challenges for the treatment of communities that are facing armed conflict. And so it is just absolute, I think it's a great way to celebrate International Women's Day, to focus on the women, peace, and security agenda by talking about the way that Burmese women have really moved to the fore of this movement and have driven it in very positive directions, overcoming past problems and bottlenecks that their history and their efforts over the past few decades to really learn to work together and to develop habits of cooperation across ethnic groups and build up civil society linkages, and how all of that is playing such an essential role in sustaining and maintaining the movement for human rights and democracy in Burma today. So with that, I'm really excited to hear what our friend Weiwei has to say.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kelly. And over to you, Weiwei.
Can you hear me? Oh, great. I'm not muted. So thank you very much, Olivia, for inviting me for this important day's event. And it is my honor to be with you today, and especially with Ambassador Kelly Curry, who I have known for many, many years since my activism has begun in 2012 and 13. I had a great privilege of learning from her, so I'm so honored to be here today. And thank you, Ambassador Kelly, for your kind remark on the women of Burma, on role of women in Myanmar and their activism. I also want to echo that I would like to congratulate and celebrate our sisters and mothers in Myanmar today, risking their life, fighting against the military dictatorship and committed to bring democracy, freedom, and justice for everybody in Myanmar. I am so inspired by young women every day challenging the military dictatorship and starting their own activism and initiatives during the revolutions. From the beginning of the military coup, starting from the protests, pot and pans banging, to the Tamang revolution, CDMs, all of these, the women were key leaders in beginning in starting all of these initiatives in the whole democracy revolutions. So I would like to honor and celebrate these women today. And also I would like to pay tribute to people like Nyat Tue Khai, and people like many other young women and elderly who have lost their life under the military dictatorship, becoming a target and victims of the violence attack. And I would also like to pay tribute and honor to the victims of sexual violence during the military coup and prior to that, including hundreds of thousands of Rohingya women. And these women are yet await for justice, and we must not forget, and we must be reminded every day unless we get justice for these women, our fight is not over. One thing that is incredible today, after all of decades of my activism, when our country was so divided by the military dictatorships and military leaderships and propaganda against the ethnic communities, before the military coup, I think people like us felt so lonely and unsupported. But today, seeing the military behavior against the entire population, terrorizing the entire populations, using same tactics that they have used against the Rohingya and other ethnic communities, repeated on all over the country. And I think, as a silver lining, the people of Burma, especially the women, come to realize a common enemy. And then we all are once again together to fight against this injustice and the military dictatorship. And that's give me some hope to rebuild and repair and rebuild this the broken trust and society that we had. And that's what I am keep going every day as well. And I think people like us has been talking about this over and over, and we want to actually end talking about the suffering of the people, and urging the world to help us. I think the world is failing the people, Myanmar women, women of Myanmar, and the entire country, and we want to be seen as a priority as well in the global stage. We want to be, our suffering should be recognized, and we want to be recognized for our suffering and pain. every single day, and we need a stronger international support. We cannot do this alone. It will be extremely harder, and we will see many losses of lives and bring damage to a lot of damage to our society. If we don't want to see this, and we really need the international support. That include the calls that you make earlier, Olivia, the United States taking leaderships actually, and showing their leadership to stop this mass atrocity crimes in Burma against women, against young people, against ethnic minorities, against politicians, and against the entire country. United States can do this, and the United States need to take leadership, show leadership in a more collaborated strategy to respond to the Myanmar crisis, the coup, and the atrocity crimes that happens against the different ethnic communities. And United States need to come up with a more coordinated and comprehensive strategy to this that should include a comprehensive targeted sanctions policy, including imposing sanctions against the Myanmar oil and gas, and also imposing global arms embargoes against the military, and holding the perpetrators of these crimes accountable. That can start by making atrocity determinations. There are evidences already collected by the State Department. It's been years, and I don't know why our suffering being ignored, and it is difficult for the U.S. State Department and Secretary Blinken to make atrocity determination. Without recognizing what happened to us, how would we want to address? How can the suffering can be addressed? It is very important that the atrocities determinations is made, and the crimes is recognized as it is genocide, and take actions to stop, to prevent the recurrence, and to bring justice to the situations. Lastly, I would also like to say, as this is the International Women's Day, I would also like to bring attention to the women's peace and security agenda. Myanmar is a classic example of the where the women's peace and security agenda should be implemented, and inside domestically, as well as should get support from the international community to be able to implement the women's peace and security. That includes ensuring women participations in all the processes in Myanmar, as well as the discussions related to the women and future of Burma abroad, whether in the US or at the UN or elsewhere, as well as providing effective protective measures for the women to from the violence attack against them. And also having a stronger preventive strategy for the women of Burma. I'll stop here. I'll be really looking forward to the discussion.
Well, thank you for that, Weiwei, and also Kelly. You yet again confirmed why I was so excited to host this program today. And there are so many communities around the globe that we could have highlighted for International Women's Day, and I'm sure at Heritage we will, because women, peace, and security is really important to us here. But I was so excited to talk about Burma, I think for so many reasons, but I'll boil it down briefly to three. Just, one, there's so much to be done. You both highlighted, not only from a women, peace, and security agenda perspective, but just from an Asia policy perspective, from a national interest perspective. There's just so much work that can be done, and a lot of work that honestly has been very deferred, as you mentioned, Weiwei, with the atrocity determination, or with some of those particularly ripe entities that can be sanctioned any day. Literally any day, an atrocity determination can be issued, or the sanctions can be issued, and for whatever reason, there's been reticence to do so. But I was also excited to highlight these issues because I'm afraid that Burma has kind of fallen off the agenda. And I'm worried about the fact that, it seems like the US government cannot seem to walk and chew gum at the same time. Obviously, there are very serious issues happening right now. Ukraine, of course, comes to mind, and our hearts go out to everyone who is there, China and the threat that is posed there. But Burma has seemingly fallen off of a lot of people's radars, and yet the people are fighting and striving every day in order to safeguard freedom that was undermined literally within a day's time. And I think the fragility of that freedom, but also the contrast, and this is sort of the third reason why I'm so excited today, the resilience and the bravery of the Burmese women. And you all highlighted very specifically that Burmese women are action-oriented. I remember in the early days after the coup, hearing about women, particularly in the medical profession, who were just so quick to act, so quick to respond and to organize and to respond to the coup. And so many brave Rohingya women within the camps who share about the atrocities that they experienced firsthand. It takes bravery to share about these types of situations. And so I'm just so grateful that you guys both highlighted all of that within your comments. And so I did want to kick off, though, with a couple of questions. And my first question is especially action-oriented, tying into what I just said, which is, if there's one thing, just one, that the US government could do tomorrow to elevate the role of Burmese women, to alleviate suffering that they are experiencing currently, what would you, like if you were sitting with Joe Biden right now, what would you tell him? You absolutely need to do this first. And either one of you can answer first.
Okay, I'll go first, I guess. So I think one thing that I would ask everybody, whether the President Biden or any other international leaders, is that to listen to the voices of women, women in Myanmar. I feel like people are not listening to us. I feel like the US government is not listening to us. They're doing what they think is right for them, but not for the people. I think the approach and the strategy has to be a bit more the community centered. And it should come from the community. Otherwise, the responses may not be as effective as they would want to see. So listening to the voices of women is key. That's the first thing. And otherwise, right now, there are many, many ways that, apart from what I have been already, I have already mentioned, there are many other ways that the U.S. government can support women of Burma. Is one way is that providing them with resources and funding. A lot of the local women organizations are become a primary humanitarian aid providers, where in many displaced area where INGOs are not allowed to provide humanitarian aid, where the military is actually blocking the humanitarian aid from reaching to the civilians. I think, providing support and equipping resources for the women organizations, local women's group is one way to practically help, and that can be done through many channels. And of course, there has to be a more flexible administrative and procedural flexible administrative procedures to be able to reach to those women directly on the ground. So that's one thing, and I just want to shed the light on how women's groups are working so hard to be able to provide relief and protections to the fellow women in displaced women in Myanmar.
That's really great. And Kelly, how about you?
Well, Wei Nu actually got at both of the, I think, things that I would have recommended, because I think that she's absolutely 100% right. It just listening to and finding those very specific ways, whether it's through funding or giving a platform and amplifying the voices of Burmese women, and recognizing the role that they're playing here is the first step to actually then incorporating those views and that the ideas and the perspectives that you get from listening to women into a policy approach. So that's got to be the first step always, is giving women the opportunity and giving them agents, recognizing their agency as critical people who are driving, not just who are leading, but also are driving solutions. And I think that as Weiwei Nu said, you have a lot of organizations that previously were focused on advocating for women's rights, advocating on gender-based violence, advocating on specific kind of women's issues, who have transformed themselves in the past year into humanitarian assistance organizations who have taken responsibility for getting food and basic medical care and shelter and other forms of immediate assistance, education for people who are displaced, for people who are facing armed conflict in their communities, and empowering those women to, whether it's through funding or by giving them platforms and listening to them and hearing what they're saying and incorporating those things into the policy approach is really the most basic thing. I think that also, further to that, one way that the administration, one concrete thing that the administration could do, in addition to the other things that we've talked about with the genocide determination and other things, is looking at the most representative body that's working within the democratic movement, the Burmese democratic movement, is the NUCC. And Weiwei Nu has participated in the NUCC, and finding a way to more formally recognize the role of the NUCC as a representative body that truly represents the broader voice of Burmese people. Again, I've supported the U.S. representing the National Unity Government and the committee representing the Pidang Suhluta, but I think that the NUCC is the by far most representative plenary organization, and finding a way to recognize its critical role as a real parliament that's playing that consultative role and providing that community engagement in ways that no other body really is right now, I think would be really helpful, because there is very, very strong representation by women in the NUCC.
That's great. Also, a reminder to our audience members that you can submit questions as we continue our discussion. But I did want to dovetail a little bit and ask, are there pre-existing feedback mechanisms that would make it easier for the administration to hear from Burmese women? Are there processes that women can start engaging in more actively, or perhaps they're already engaged in, that the administration and or Congress could take advantage of?
Maybe Ambassador Kelly.
Kelly, I think you're on mute. Sorry.
You're right. Sorry, I'm on mute. Sorry. One thing that I've seen, not just with Burma, but also with Afghanistan, is the administration has refused to support giving Burmese women the opportunity to participate in the Commission on the Status of Women at the UN. And Burma and Afghanistan both will not be represented by women from their countries this year at the commission. And this is the premier platform for women's participation. And I know Weiwei has participated in CSW activities in the past, and other Burmese women have actively participated in side events. But I think this, for there to be empty chairs for Burma and for Afghanistan this year at CSW is very discouraging, and I think it shows a lack of real willingness to do the needful when it comes down to it, that the U.S. and other Western countries have not fought to have not supported Burmese women even in this basic representational way.
That's really helpful. Wei, did you have any additions on that, or should we move to a next question?
No, I think that is absolutely right. And, democratic society and country like the US should actually respect the voices of people more than any other countries, and respect what people are calling for, and giving space for the people of the country, not the military or any other illegitimate body. We have legitimate body, and we have people themselves standing up for themselves, and these people should be given space, and being vacant is I think it's shameful, and it shouldn't happen. And there should be a stronger I guess effort and consideration to fill that gap. I think otherwise, I'm not sure if there is any other mechanisms available to provide feedback internally in the US. For us, I have not seen any platform that we have a venue to be able to provide feedbacks on different policy, apart from meetings with some individuals at the State Department or other bodies. I don't think we have any formal platform, and I think it would be really, really effective if we have such a platform, like a process of providing feedback and learning about the situations officially. Perhaps maybe that can be created. I don't know if there's nothing exists, and I think there is a huge gap on the policy attentions when it's come to Myanmar. I feel like I've been here for a couple of years, and I've been engaging with the different bodies in the U.S. government, but I still feel like every time it's the same. There is no improvement. Before the coup, when genocide was ongoing in 2016 and 17, and today, there is no improvement. The same way of thinking, the same way approach. And this has to be changed on Myanmar. I don't know why they have failed Rohingya. Now they're failing the entire country. When are we going to really bring democracy in Myanmar and peace in Myanmar? We people deserve peace and democracy as well, like many other nations around the world. And I hope to see a more proactive approach and engagement to bring peace and democracy in Myanmar, and also ensuring women participation in these discussions and meetings, and women participations. When I said including the ensuring the participations of ethnic and religious minorities, the most vulnerable communities, Rohingya themselves, must be included in all discussions related to Myanmar or our future.
Yeah, really, really, really impassioned points, and I completely agree with you. So we have a question from an audience member who is asking, they currently are working with a woman in Shan State who has created a school for the internally displaced community in the Inle Lake region. Oh my goodness, this is so generous. They've actually raised some funds for her school, but are facing challenges in transferring the funds to her because some of the international banking regulations. Do either of you have advice on safe ways, on effective ways to ensure that these funds actually make it to the people that they're trying to serve? Kelly, I see you shaking your head there.
Yeah, there are amazing organizations, especially working in Thailand, that are doing incredible cross-border work. The Shan Women's Action Network, SWAN, which Wei Nu will know very well. Our friends Tay Tay and Charmtong, and I think Olivia has met some of those amazing SWAN women, from the Shan Women Action Network, and they're. When you were asking about existing platforms, there have been these women's organizations that have been working especially in the ethnic areas, but not exclusively, but the ethnic women's organizations have been among the most robust, most together groups that are they're the most effective. Even before the coup, they were really they were plugged into their communities. They know what the needs are, and they see a problem. They solve the problem. They work on it. They have a bias toward action, and they get things done. And the men often are sitting in a room, talking, drinking tea and smoking cigarettes, and the women are out actually getting stuff done and meeting the needs of the communities. So I think that you see this in Burma very, very distinctly. And the men say that they're practicing politics, but to me, the real politics is the women out there identifying the needs in the communities and finding ways to meet them with very little resources and very little support, including from their own government and often from the leaders in their own communities.
That's really helpful. Did you have any other groups you suggest? Wei?
So I think, there are many other groups on the ground, like the Karen Women Organization, Karen Peace Network, a huge need in Karenni State, Kaya State. There are Kaya Women Organization and local youth group. I think they need a lot of support because the state is so remote and nothing is reaching there. Information gap is huge there, and the military is severely targeting the Kaya State. Almost 3/4 of the population has been already displaced. So that's where a gap is. And try to reach out to those organizations. Regarding the fund transfer, I think Ambassador Kelly knows this. In the past, during the previous military dictatorship, people find ways to get into the funding and resources into Myanmar through hundi systems or through different forms of intermediaries, including individuals and organizations. So if you're connected to one group or individuals, try to ask them for their advice and how they want to be receiving. And, a lot of the time they know these processes because that become at some point a practice.
And there are great organizations here in the United States too that can help. And I'm happy to, do some follow up and help with and help this person if they are having a hard time to get the funds inside, because we know how to do this. We've been doing it for many years, and since the coup, some things have gotten harder, but it's still possible.
Yeah, no, it's so inspirational how many women here in the U.S. are working behind the scenes to really equip women in Burma and vice versa. And so, yeah, so grateful for your leadership on that. We have another question on women, peace, and security strategy specifically. So, both of you have mentioned in your remarks the importance of WPS strategy, and obviously it looks different under different administrations. What are some of the strengths of the current strategy and some areas where maybe there could be some growth, and how would that help Burmese women in particular to make sure that WPS, obviously it's a congressional priority as well as a executive level one. Are there some effective ways that folks in both branches of government can be thinking about making the best use of WPS work?
Well, I feel like actually WPS is one of those rare areas in Washington that's very bipartisan, and that where we enjoy very strong bipartisan support. And so I don't think you see a huge amount actually of difference between what the WPS strategy looked like in the previous administration and in the current administration. We had just in 2020 completed a massive, with the passage of the Women, Peace, and Security Act and signing it into law, we had just completed a number of steps in that process in 2020. And so I think that it's more a question of updating and tweaking then radically reorienting or changing those strategies. What I think, though, continues to be the problem that we have these strategies that look very nice on paper and have a lot of commitments in them, but they're not being implemented when it really counts. And we saw this with Afghanistan. We've seen it with Burma. We're not seeing the full integration of the philosophy that underpins women, peace, and security, that we will have better outcomes around conflict, that we will have better outcomes in countries when women are not just participating, but are meaningfully participating in peace processes and negotiations in all aspects of the peace and security equation, including service in the security forces and leading in military engagement and leading in policy making. So I think that's, the problem is not so much that there's a difference of approach between the political parties in Washington. It's that both parties have not really taken the serious steps that are necessary to really implement a meaningful women, peace, and security policy.
That's great.
I think just to add on that, I think when we talk about WPS, people just end up having discussions around women participations. I know that women participation is a key element, one of the key elements of the women's peace and security, and it has to be done in a meaningful participations. A strategy to have a meaningful participations of women in during the conflict and in post-conflict and in all the decision-making processes and rebuilding processes as well. And that is key, and that's what Ambassador Kelly has highlighted. I also want to bring the other two aspects of the women's peace and security agenda that often missed or disregard, which is the preventions and protections. So that's why I was actually emphasizing on the accountability and justice for the women survivors of violence during the conflicts, and also having a stronger strategy on the recovery, repair and recovery and rehabilitations of these women survivors and women in general after the conflict. And I think that is also current, being able to provide relief is part of the WPS, and being able to having a good strategy on the recovery and rehabilitations it's also a must. And for that, I think we need actions immediately, and we need to be able to basically take actions and intervene on those aspects of the women's peace and security right away as conflict is happening. And for Myanmar to be able to implement those, I think one key important element here is to basically pass the Burma Act as well, and that will open a lot of the doors to implement women's peace and security agenda and other policy strategy or other available, mechanisms to equip the Burmese people. Passing Burma Act is critical, and also recognizing the crimes, genocides happen against Rohingya, crimes against humanity happening all over now, and war crimes are happening, and these has to be recognized. Then it's become easier to implement the women's peace and security agenda, or to really push for a stronger policy strategy. Otherwise, there has been a lot of delay and pushback, and bodies looking into one another, and nothing is moving forward as efficiently as it's supposed to be.
Well, I was going to take moderator's prerogative and ask you, what can we do for Rohingya women? But you've just summarized it absolutely perfectly there. And so I'm just truly grateful.
I would still like to bring up the situations of Rohingya women, which I wasn't able to address earlier. And I think the coup has posed additional risks to the Rohingya women's lives in Myanmar and in Bangladesh and across the Southeast Asia. the military is actually imposing more and more limitations and restrictions against their people, remaining Rohingya in Rakhine State. And that include by introducing this family check-in processes, very derogatory and humiliating process against the Rohingya people, and where the security forces go to the village village by village and take a photograph of the Rohingya individuals, including women and children and their animals. For women, they took off their scarf, and the whole process is like, it just remove their dignity and reminded that you are being targeted, you are being persecuted, and you are facing this just because who you are. And that process has resumed, as well as there are many more repressive measures introduced against their daily life, including restrictions on travel, restrictions on movement, and imposing this the national verification card, which Rohingya said genocide card. Because of all of these pressures, the restrictions, severe restrictions imposed recently, we are seeing more and more people, especially women, choosing to leave the Rakhine State homes by taking very, very risky routes by land or by boat. A lot of the time, these women are not safe whether they take it by land or by boat, and they could become, victims of sexual abuse and sex trafficking and slavery. And if they're not, if they're lucky enough not to be drowned in the sea, Andaman Sea. And that is happening. And at the same time, military has actually arrested at least 856 Rohingya since the coup for leaving Rakhine State or coming back to Rakhine State from Bangladesh. In a few cases, they're arresting and detaining Rohingya and penalizing, basically sentencing them 2 to 3 years of imprisonment. Majority of these detainees are women and children. Women's Peace Network has recently issued a report about it. And that is a really serious issue that I think people are ignoring amid the coup. And in Bangladesh, the situations has deteriorated drastically over the past couple of years. Today, we had a big fire in Kudubalongkeng, Camp 5, and that fire, accidental fire, has been happening every 1 to 2 months. I think over the past 3-4 months, there has been at least 4 fires happened. And in most cases, people are, even there are incidents of people the death because people cannot leave the camps while the fire is the fire is happening, because there are fences that put in place by the Bangladesh Authority across the camps. Mm-hmm. So now, talking to many women in the camps, they feel like they are once again facing similar situations in the camps and being fenced and being treated as basically criminals, prisoners, and not only fencing, but also increasing securitizations in the camps in different manners. Women are not safe at all. They can be targeted in many, many ways, in addition to the pressure that they have been forced to send to Bashangsha, or deprivations of their livelihood, for example, shutting down the local shops, the refugee shops within the camps that only generate little amount of money for their survival, and very tiny vegetable shops or the produce shops that has been closed And there are many other ways that the restrictions has introduced against the refugees, including closing down the refugee-led self-help education center, very small education center that give women hope, seeing their children going to school. Of course, it's not like really good quality school, but at least feeling some hope that their children can go to school. And all of these opportunities has closed down. So I think when we talk about Rohingya women, I think we have to see all of this in a bigger picture. And I think there has to be a stronger support for the Rohingya women and their suffering, and help and suffering of the community in general.
See, this is why I invited both of you to join me. I feel like we have been able to cover in a relatively short period of time, both the situation facing Burmese women after the coup, but also more specifically Rohingya women. And so I'm just so grateful to both of you for the incredible advocacy that you each do independently, whether that's inside of government, outside of government, on personal time, on work time. I know that this is a whole of life cause that you both are devoted to. And so it is an honor for me to be able to host you here today. And hopefully it's been a blessing to others to be able to listen in today. But thank you so much to both of you, Weiwei Nu and to Ambassador Kelly Curry for joining us today on the Heritage stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much.